What do you make of this warning from the former MI6 chief? This is Sir Alex Younger saying that there are thousands of jihadis being held in Syria. We understand some 70 Brits, 15 men jihadis, some 20 brides, the likes of, Shamima Begum among them, and some 40 children. And he says, look, if they are released from these various prison camps in northern Syria, then, that is going to be a threat to the West. How seriously should we take that?
I think we should take it very seriously. And I think there's been too little discussion about this problem over the past few years. Hundreds of British-born people went to Syria to join the death cult of ISIS. I think the numbers are around 800 or 900 people. A lot of them have already come back. Yep. Some have been charged. Not enough of them have been charged, in my view. But there are still some there in the Kurdish-run prisons. And these people pose a threat. If you run away from a civilized country like Britain to join one of the most evil movements on earth, and you assist in the slaughter of innocent Syrians and Kurdish people and women and gay people and so on, then you are by definition a threat. You are by definition a problem. So I think the countries of Europe have got to be very careful not just to throw open the doors to these citizens of ours who've done something very, very wicked.
This is the thing, the big battles over Shamima Begum. I was always the view, look, she's a British citizen. She hasn't got a right to citizenship anywhere else. She's our problem, but I want her in prison here. But given that we wouldn't put her in prison here for her undoubted crimes, I'm sorry, she was supporting Islamic State, a terrorist organisation. There you go. I don't think she was far too bad. She wasn't groomed. It's an absolute load of nonsense. But given that she's not there, I'm afraid I don't want her back. Now, she's lost her British citizenship, but her lawyer today has said that he believes that actually this has bolstered her chances of coming back. Now, Assad has gone. Do you think that she would ever be allowed back in this country? Should she?
I personally don't think she should. And my view is that if you join a group like ISIS, or if you throw your support behind a group like ISIS, you yourself have destroyed your British citizenship. Yeah. Because you joined our sworn foes in what was at the time a global battle. This is a movement that killed people not only in Syria and Iraq, but across Europe, in France, in Germany, and in Britain. ISIS inspired some of the worst terrorist attacks here, including the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017, in which loads of kids were killed. If you go and join a movement that is responsible for those kinds of atrocities against Britain and against Europe, then you destroy your citizenship yourself. So I don't really think these people should be allowed back. I think we've got to be very firm and say, listen, this to us is like running away in the 1930s to join the Nazi Party. Yeah. And that's a very serious crime. It's a crime of treason. And I think we have to be very hard on people who do treasonous things.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the asylum seekers who are here in this country already, we've got some 6,500 Syrians who have claimed asylum from mostly arriving on Channel boats. 1 in 6 of those who do get granted refugee status in this country is from or claims to be from Syria, given that we know so many people destroy their paperwork. Should we be saying to those people, well, Assad's gone now. Assad was the reason you were here. Off you toddle back to Syria. Would that be reasonable given the chaos currently in that country?
I think this is probably a bit more of a tricky question, because I think it's absolutely true that part of being a refugee is that eventually you go home. And we were told time and again, these people are not migrants, they're not economic migrants, they're not just coming here to work. They're refugees, they're seeking asylum. Fine, a lot of them were genuine refugees, but part of being a refugee is that once things settle in your homeland, you return home. Yeah. So I think that's a very good argument to make in relation to the Syrians here, but it's a little bit tricky because Syria is still in a state of flux. I don't think the conflict is going to stop anytime soon. We know Turkey is in there going against the Kurds. We know that Israel is making moves to try and settle things down as well. So I think it's not so simple as just shoving the door in people's faces and saying go home. But at the same time, if we are serious about the refugee situation, then part of that is helping people to return home when we can.
Indeed. Well, talking of people coming to this country, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, yesterday warned the EU that making hardline demands for the post-Brexit reset of relations with the UK risks harming their economic and all of our economic growth. She's basically saying this demand that there should be free movement for young people to come and live and work in this country and guaranteed fishing rights and all of that in return for better trading relations, she says will actually damage the EU. Now, I mean, interesting to see, sounds like she's almost standing up for British rights and Brexit there, which I think will come as a surprise to many of us. But do you hold out any faith as a fellow Brexiteer that actually this incredibly, not just Remain, but Remona Labour government, bearing in mind that Keir Starmer spent a good 3 years trying to undermine Brexit until the 2019 election was won by Boris Johnson to get Brexit done, that actually they will pave the way towards some sort of, you know, basically sort of going back in, but not really wink to the EU, opening our borders to more young people to come and work here?
Yeah, I don't trust this Labour government with Brexit at all. It would be like asking a fox to look after the chickens. We know this is a government of people who not only voted Remain, but as you say, were passionately opposed to Brexit and actually tried to stop it from happening. Yep. That's a very serious thing to do because 17.4 million people voted for Brexit, and we were two of them, you and I, Julia. So I don't trust them with Brexit, and I think it's very worrying that Rachel Reeves is attending the Eurogroup meeting of finance ministers. You know, that's not something that she should be going to. And also these talks about a reset. Look, of course, we need relations with the European Union. They're right next door to us. We trade with them and we should deal with them. But it sounds to me like they're making demands already of Brexit Britain. They want us to accept freedom of movement. They want us to water down some of our Brexit approaches that we've been taking. And I don't trust that Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer will be able to stand up to that for very long. So Brexiteers have got to be incredibly vigilant. We voted to sever our ties with the European Union, and we've got to stick to that as a country.
Yeah, absolutely. I held out no hope. I really don't. Let me also talk to you about what's going on in the Middle East a bit further afield than from Syria, although, of course, Israel very much involved in what's going on, been bombing some of those Syrian rebel fuel dumps, weapons dumps and depots and airfields and the like, basically saying, you know, you're not going to be a threat to us, whatever happens in Syria. But we've also seen the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. He's accused of bribery, fraud and breach of trust. She's sitting in a trial, a corruption trial, as of today, becoming the first sitting Prime Minister in Israel's history to take the witness stand in his own corruption trial. He's called this a witch hunt, appearing in a Tel Aviv district court. Now, what happens in the very independent judicial system of Israel is a matter for the Israeli people, and if people are charged with crimes, or whoever they are, Prime Minister or not, I think they should face those trials. Very different system in America, as we know. However, what did you make of the fact that there is an arrest warrant out from the International Criminal Court for Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes? But President Bashar al-Assad, a man who has been a brutal dictator for years, who has killed some 500,000 of his own people, gassed innocent men, women and children in their homes and schools in his own country, bombed, tortured, brutally murdered so many people. He's now taken his spare $2 billion and headed off to Moscow. He hasn't faced an arrest warrant from either the ICJ or the ICC. But Benjamin Netanyahu, a democratically elected Prime Minister of Israel, has, over a war that's only been going on for a year, as opposed to a civil war that's been going on since 2011. Why do you think that is, Brendan?
Isn't it interesting that it's always Israel that gets accused of genocide and war crimes, and not only by the International Criminal Court, and the ICJ is thinking about this as well, but also by activists on the streets and sections of the media class. They're obsessed with this idea that Israel is a uniquely murderous nation and a uniquely genocidal nation. And I'm sorry, but to my mind, this has long ago crossed the line from legitimate political criticism into outright bigotry, because they don't say this, as you say, about Syria, even though Assad butchered 500,000 of his own countrymen and asked Russia to help him to do so. They tend not to say it about Russia. They don't generally accuse Russia of committing genocide. They don't say it about the war in Sudan or the wars in the Congo over the past 20 years, in which millions died. They only say it about Israel. And I'm sorry, but it sometimes looks like taunting of the Jews, because they know, Howard Jacobson, the great Jewish novelist, made this point. He said, why do people always compare Gaza to the Warsaw Ghetto and Israel to the Nazis? And he said they do it because the aim is to wound Jewish people, to punish them with their own grief. And I'm sorry, but I see a lot of that in these accusations against Netanyahu and against Israel more broadly. We need a much more normal discussion about what Israel is doing, which in my mind is a just war against an army of anti-Semites that attacked it last year.
Yeah, I mean, again, you've written about this extensively, the author of After the Pogrom, 7th of October, Israel and the Crisis of Civilization, and it's a superb book. I advise everyone to read it. Because, you know, again, this is, again, what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Israel. This is not stuff that's just happening over there, nothing to do with us. It has impacts here. And let's talk about the impact here, because we've had recently a debate at the Oxford Union. This is the big debating society of Oxford University, one of the top universities in the world, one of our two leading universities, where there was the most extraordinary, not just anti-Israeli, but anti-Semitism expressed, even to the extent that, you know, the president of the union refusing to dine with the Jewish speakers, but somehow still at the university. People asked by a show of hands whether or not, if they had information about the Hamas attack in advance, would they have told the authorities? And 75% of them said no, they would not. This is absolutely terrifying, and it's happening in a British university, one of our leading universities. These people are going to go out and run the country one day, Brendan, and yet these views are apparently commonplace. What do you make of that?
I thought what happened at the Oxford Union was horrific. It was an orgy of anti-Semitism in the highest seat of learning in this country, one of the highest seats of learning in the world. And the scenes we saw were horrific. You know, as you say, around 75% of the attendees said they wouldn't have informed on Hamas if they'd found out its plans on the 7th of October. That translates into them saying they would have allowed the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust to take place. Yeah. They were essentially saying we would have been complicit in the mass murder of Jews rather than snitch on Hamas, which is how they would see it. There was another scene where one of the speakers said he was a proud Jew, and you could see people in the audience rolling their eyes. I mean, this is not anti-Zionism. This is not criticism of Israel. This is not opposition to war. This is Jew hatred on the campuses of Oxford in 2024. It was really horrific, and I think it really demonstrates how far down the well of identity politics and the new racism and all sorts of other problematic ideologies universities like Oxford have fallen. Yeah. And if that's not a wake-up call to the people who run Oxford University, I don't know what will be.
No, indeed. Well, one of the people speaking in that debate is going to be joining us in the studio tomorrow, and we'll talk more about that. And again, it's something that's been online, but we haven't had a chance to talk about it on air. But interestingly, we're going to be talking to a guest in a few moments' time, Connie Shaw, again, not very different university, Leeds University, and she's seeing her freedom of speech under threat. It's something I know you talked about many times in the past as well, about simply expressing what, I hate this phrase, gender critical beliefs. I just call it stating facts. Men can't become women, women can't become men, a trans woman is a man, a trans man is a woman. You know, just basic facts. But she, again, no hate, no transphobia, no nothing, just simply in interviews with people like Graham Linehan, one of our most fantastic, you know, previously most celebrated TV scriptwriters, for goodness sake, creators of great comedies. He, you know, interviewed him on his podcast, on her podcast, and has basically been sacked from Leeds University Union Radio because she's not inclusive enough. I mean, we are in a very scary situation. I'm glad the Free Speech Union, I know you also a key member of that, is helping her. But we are in a very strange state of play where universities are where there is no free speech, and the only people who do seem to have free speech on universities, to the extent that it does exist, are anti-Semites and women hating men. It's getting very scary out there.
It's getting really scary. And, you know, I think it's Orwellian what has happened to Connie Shaw, because she basically wants to say 2 + 2 = 4, i.e. men can't become women. And these people are saying, no, 2 + 2 = 5, and a man can be a woman if he wants to. It's this very Kafkaesque form of censorship. And it also is incredibly misogynistic, because the abuse that women in particular get, I mean, I've been saying gender critical things for a very long time, but I don't get nearly as much abuse as you do, Julia, or Posey Parker.
I don't get that. The thing I find hilarious is often I'll get these people just say, like, oh, you look like you've transitioned. I'm just sort of, What, is that the best you've got? Like, is that...
Yeah.
What I love is, if I said that to someone, then I'd be being transphobic. But I'm just like, what, is that the best you've got with your argument? You're just going like, oh, you look like a man. I mean, oh, well done. I mean, it's embarrassing is what it is.
It's pathetic, and it's so obviously sexist. A lot of these you know, I've often said that trans activism is misogyny in drag, because you know they can say the kind of things apparently that a normal bloke would be told off if he said. They make fun of women, they tell them to shut the hell up, they barge into women's spaces, they undress in front of women, which we used to call indecent exposure, and now we call it trans rights. They do all of these things, but because they're trans or trans allies, apparently they're allowed to do it.
Yeah,
I don't think.
Totally. Look, just finally, I must ask you about this. This has just been handed to me. Times Person of the Year 2024. The nominees are out. By the way, these are always tragic, these options. Try not to guffaw at the first one. Promise. Sam Armstrong also here. You'll like this. Nominees. Times Person of the Year 2024. Kamala Harris.
Oh, my God. Wow.
I mean, really? These people, are they on drugs at the time? Kamala Harris, Kate Middleton. Now, I mean, lovely girl, and I'm really sorry what she's gone through, but I'm not quite sure, you know, your own personal battles with cancer are necessarily making you Person of the Year internationally. Elon Musk, very influential. Yulia Navalny, of course, her husband, Alexei Navalny, a Russian dissident who died in prison. She's going to continue his work. I mean, she's a brave soul. Benjamin Netanyahu, Jerome Powell, who's been the chairman of the US Federal Reserve. I mean, what? Joe Rogan, obviously, major podcaster. Claudia Sheinbaum, she's Mexico's first ever female president. Donald Trump and Mark Zuckerberg. I can only see two names on that list that I think should be up for Times Person of the Year, and they are either Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu. But if you think Kamala Harris, or however we're pronouncing her name this week, what do you make of this, Brendan?
Unbelievable. I mean, Kamala Harris, they're rewarding failure. That's what's happening there. She ran an awful campaign. She completely failed to convince the American public. She lost even more working class voters from the Democrats. She failed on every single front. Whereas Trump would be a deserving winner because he just won an incredibly convincing second term by creating a brand new coalition, a cross-race coalition of working class people who are sick and tired of the establishment. That's something I think worth celebrating. But Kamala Harris, no way.
Indeed. Brendan O'Neil, fantastic to talk to you. Chief political writer at Spy. Always good to be joined by you. He's also author of that brilliant new book, After the Pogrom, 7th of October, Israel and the Crisis of Civilization.